Guess I'm on chapter 12. I thought I was on chapter 11. Melinda, welcome, Melinda. Melinda says, "Hey, what's going on? How you doing?" I have to just move the camera. There we go. Oh my god, I'm so excited you're reading to us. Oh, I'm so excited. Are you reading to us? Yes, I'm about to read. Yes. We just started, and we are on chapter 12. I thought we were on chapter 11. We're on chapter 12. Oh, my nose itches. Two Fine Twin, welcome. Melinda, I'm so excited that you're excited. Ortega, welcome. I couldn't entirely shake the horror, the gore of my dream as I walked down the dark halls of the manor, the servants and Lucian long since asleep. But I had to do something, anything, after that nightmare, if only to avoid sleeping. A bit of paper in one hand and a pen gripped in the other. I carefully traced my steps, noticing the windows and doors and exits, occasionally jotting down vague sketches and X's on parchment. It was the best I could do, and to any literate human, my markings would have made no sense. But I couldn't write or read more than my basic letters, and my makeshift map was better than nothing. If I were to remain here, it was essential to know the best hiding places, the easiest way out, should things ever go badly for me. I couldn't entirely let go of my instinct. It was too dim to admire any of the paintings lining the walls, and I didn't dare risk a candle. These past 3 days, there had been servants in the halls. When I worked up the nerve to look at the art, that part of me that spoke to Nessa's voice had laughed at the idea of an ignorant human trying to admire fairy art. Some other time, then, I told myself. I would find another day, a quiet hour, where no one was around. Where no one was around to look at them. I had plenty of hours now, a whole lifetime in front of me. Perhaps I'd figure out what I wished to do with it. I crept down the main staircase, moonlight flooding in the black and white tiles of the entrance halls. I reached the bottom, my bare feet silent on the cold tiles, and listened. Nothing. No one. I set my little map on the foyer table and drew a few X's and circles to signify the doors and windows, the marble stairs of the front hall. I would become so familiar with the house that I could navigate it even if someone blinded me. A breeze announced his arrival, and I turned from the table toward the long hall to open the glass door to the garden. I'd forgotten how huge it was in the form, forgotten the curled horns and lupine face, the bear-like body that moved like a feline fluidly. His green eyes glowed in the darkness, fixed on me, and the door snickered shut behind him. The clicking of claws on marble filled the hall. I stood still, not daring to flinch, to move a muscle. He limped slightly, and in the moonlight, dark, shining stains were left in his wake. He continued toward me, stealing the air from the entire hall. He was so big that the space felt cramped like a cage. The scrape of claw, a huff, or even breathing, the dripping of blood. Between one step and the next, he changed forms, and I squeezed my eyes shut in the blinding flash. When at last my eyes adjust to the returning darkness, he was standing in front of me. Standing, but not quite there. No sign of Baldric, or his knives. His clothes were in shreds, long, vicious, slashes that made me wonder how he wasn't gutted and dead. But the muscled skin peered out beneath his shirt was smooth, unharmed. Did you kill the bogey? My voice was hardly more than a whisper. Welcome, game. Yes, a dull, empty answer, as if he couldn't be bothered to remember to be pleasant, as if I were at the very, very bottom of a long list of priorities. You're hurt, I said even more quietly. Welcome, Peyton. Indeed, his hand was covered in blood, even more splattered on the floor beneath him. He looked at it blankly, as if it took some monumental effort to remember that he even had a hand, and that it was injured. What effort or will and strength had it take to kill a bogey, to face what wretched menace? How deep had he had to dig inside himself, to whatever immortal power and animal that lived there, to kill it? He glanced down at the map on the table, and his face was void of anything, any emotion, any anger or amusement. SRJH, welcome. What's going on, bruv? How you doing? As he said, what is that? Oh, Melinda. There we go. Lost Gain sending a rose. Melinda sending 5 heart puffs and 8 roses. There we go. Nice. You're a bossy boss. That's how you know you're cool. Ow, ow. He glanced down at the map at the table. His voice was void of anything, any emotion, any anger or amusement, as he said, what is that? I snatched up the map. I thought, I should learn my surroundings. Drip, drip, drip. I opened my mouth to point out to his hand again, but he said, you can't write, can you? I didn't answer. I didn't know what to say. Ignorant, insignificant human. No wonder you became so adept at other things. I suppose he was far gone in thinking about his encounter with the bogey that he hadn't realized the compliment he'd given me, if it was a compliment. Another a splatter on the marble. Where can we clean up your hand? He lifted his head and looked at me again, still and silent and weary. Then he said, there's a small infirmary. I wanted to tell myself that it was probably the most useful thing I'd learned all night. But as I followed him there, avoiding the blood he trailed, I thought of what Lucien had told me about his isolation, that burden. Thought of what Tamlin had mentioned about how the estates should have not been his, and felt sorry for him. The infirmary was well shocked, but was more of a supply closet with a work table than an actual place to host sick fairies. I suppose that was all they needed when they could heal themselves. Adara smashing that like a button. What's going on, Adara? How you doing? All they needed when they could heal themselves and their immortal powers. But this wound wasn't healing. Tamlin slumped against the edge of the table, gripping his injured hand at the wrist as he watched me sort through the supplies in the cabinets and drawers. When I'd gathered what I needed, I tried not to balk at the thought of touching him, but I didn't let myself give in to the dread as I took his hand, the heat of the skin like the inferno against my cool fingers. I cleaned off his bloody, dirty hand, bracing for the first flash of those claws, but his claws remained retracted, and he kept silent as I bound and wrapped his hand. Surprisingly enough, there were no more than few vicious cuts, none of them requiring stitching. I secured the bandage in place and stepped away, bringing the bowl of bloody water in the deep sink in the back of the room. His eyes were a brand upon me as I finished cleaning, and the room became too small, too hot. He killed the bogey and walked away relatively unscathed. If Tamlin was that powerful, then the High Lords of Perithian must be near gods. Every mortal instinct in my body bleeding in panic at the thought. SRJ says, randomly jumped on Twitch and saw you live. Hope things are well for you. Yo, absolutely amazing, broski. I hope everything's going amazing for you as well, dude. Tell me something new. As I look up, I'm going to read it. You guys, real quick, we are on chapter 12 of A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. We are at a point where she just met a I'm not sure I remember meeting this individual though. Yeah, I don't remember meeting this individual, but yeah. So here we go. We're going to jump back into chapter 12. Okay. I read that. I was almost at the open door, stifling the urge to bolt back to my room, when he said, "You can't write, yet you learn to hunt. To survive, how?" I paused with my foot on the threshold. That's what happens when you're responsible for lives other than your own, isn't it? You do what you have to do. He was sitting at the table, still straddling that inner line between the here and now and whatever he had to go in his mind to endure that fight with the bogey. I met his ferrule and the glowing stare. "You aren't what I expected for a human," he said. I didn't reply, and he didn't say goodbye as I walked out. The next morning, as I made my way down to that grand staircase, I tried not to think too much about the clean washed marble tiles on the floor below. No sign of the blood Tamlin had lost. I tried not to think too much at all about our encounter, actually. So it was Tamlin. Interesting. When I found the front hall empty, I almost smiled. Felt a ripple in the hollow emptiness that had been hounding me. Perhaps now, perhaps in the moment of quiet, I could at last look through the art of the walls, take time to observe it, learn it, admire it. Heart racing at the thought. I was about to head toward the hall, and I had noted was nearly covered in painting after painting, when low male voices floated out from the dining room. I paused. The voices were tense enough that I made my steps silent as I slid into the shadows behind the open door. A cowardly, wretched thing to do, but what they were saying had me shoving aside any guilt. "I just wanted to know what you think you were doing." It was Lucy in that familiar lazy viciousness, coding each word. "What are you doing?" Tamlin snapped. Through the space between the hinge and the door, I glimpsed the two of them standing almost face to face. On Tamlin's non-bandaged hand, his claw shone in the morning light. Me? Lucian had his hand on his chest. "By the cauldron? Tam, there isn't much time, and you're just sulking and glowering. You're not even trying to fake it anymore." My brows rose. Tamlin turned away but whirled back at the moment later, his teeth bared. It was a mistake from the start. I can't stomach it. Now, after my father did to their kind, to their lands, I won't follow in his footsteps. Won't be that sort of person. So backed off. So back off. Back off. Back off while you seal our fates and ruin everything. I stayed with you out of hope, not to watch you stumble. For someone with a heart of stone, yours is certainly soft these days. The bogey was on our lands. The bogey, Tamlin. The barriers between our courts have vanished, and even our woods are teeming with filth like the puka. Are you just going to start living out there, slaughtering every bit of vermin that sinks in? Watch your mouth, Tamlin said. Lucian stepped towards him, exposing his teeth as well. A pulsing kind of air hit me in the stomach, like a metallic stench, filled my nose, but I couldn't see any magic, only felt it. I couldn't tell if that made it worse. Don't push me, Lucian. Tamlin's tone became dangerously quiet, and the hair on my back of my neck stood as he emitted a growl that was pure animal. You think I don't know what happened on my own lands? What I've got to lose? What's lost already? The blight. Perhaps it was contained, but it seemed it was still wreaking havoc, still a threat, and perhaps one they truly didn't want me knowing about, either from lack of trust or because I was no one and nothing to them. I leaned forward, but as I did, my finger slipped and softly thudded against a door. A human might not have heard, but whole high fade world. My heart stumbled. I stepped toward the threshold, clearing my throat as I came up with a dozen excuses to shield myself. I looked at Lucian and forced myself to smile. His eyes widened, and I had to wonder if it was because of that smile or because I looked truly guilty. Are you going out for a ride? I said, feeling a bit sick as I gestured behind him with a thumb. I hadn't planned on riding with him today, but it sounded like a decent excuse. Lucian's russet eye was bright. Through the smile he gave me, didn't meet it. Though the smile he gave me didn't meet it, the face of Tamlin's emissary, more court-trained and calculating that I'd seen him yet. I'm unavailable today, he said. He jerked his chin to Tamlin. He'll go with you. Tamlin shot his friend a look of disdain and that he took a few pains to hide. His unusual baldric was armed with more knives than I'd seen before, and their ornate metals handled glistened. As he turned to me, his shoulders tight. Whatever you want to go, just say so. Whenever you want to go, just say so. The claws on his free hand slipped back under his skin. No, I almost said it aloud as I turned pleading eyes to Lucian. Lucian merely patted my shoulder as he passed by. Perhaps tomorrow, human. Alone with Tamlin, I swallowed hard. He stood there waiting. I don't want to go for a hunt, I finally said quietly. True, I hate hunting. He cocked his head. Then, what do you want to do? Tamlin led me down the halls. A soft breeze, laced with the scent of roses, slipped in through the open windows to caress my face. You've been going for hunts, Tamlin said at last, but you really don't have any interest in hunting. He cast me a sidelong glance. No wonder you two never catch anything. No trace of the hollow, cold warrior of the night before, or of the angry fey noble of minutes before. Just Tamlin right now, it seemed. I'd be a fool to let my guard down around Tamlin, to think that his acting naturally meant anything, especially when something was so clearly amiss at his estate. He'd taken down the bogey, and that made him the most dangerous creature I'd ever encountered. I didn't quite know what to make of him, and said somewhat stilledly, "How's your hand?" He flexed his bandaged hand, studying the white binding stark and clean against the sun-kissed skin. I didn't think you. You don't need to. But he shook his head, and his golden hair caught the head of the morning light, as if it were spun from the sun itself. The bogey's bite was crafted to slow the heating of high fae long enough to kill us. You have my gratitude. When I shrugged it off, he added, how did you learn to bind wounds like this? I can still use the hand, even with the wrappings. Trial and error. I had to be able to pull the bowstring the next day. He was quiet. As we turned down another sun-drenched marble hallway, and I dared to look at him, I found him carefully studying me, his lips in a thin line. Has anyone ever taken care of you? He asked quietly. No. I'd long since stopped feeling sorry for myself about it. Did you learn to hunt in a similar manner? Trial and error. Trial and error. I spied on hunters when I could get away with it, and then practice until I hit something. When I missed, we didn't eat. So learning how to aim was the first thing I figured out. I'm curious, he said casually. The amber in his green eyes was glowing. Perhaps not all traces of the beast warrior were gone. Are you ever going to use that knife you stole from my table? I stiffened. How did you know? Beneath the mask, I could have sworn his brows were raised. I was trained to notice things like that, those things. But I could smell the fear on you more than anything. I grumbled. I thought no one noticed. He gave me a crooked smile, more genuine than all the fake smiles and flattery he'd given me before. Regardless of the treaty, if you want to stand a chance of escaping my kind, you'll need to think more creatively than stealing dinner knives. But with your affinity for eavesdropping, maybe you'll someday learn something valuable. My ears flattered with heat. I wasn't sorry, I mumbled, but I ran through what I overheard. There was no point in pretending I hadn't eavesdropped. Lucien said you didn't have much time. What did he mean? Are more creatures like the bogey going to come here thanks to the blight? Tamlin went rigid, scanning the hall around us, taking in every sight. The sound and scent. Then he shrugged, too stiff to be genuine. I'm immortal. I have nothing but time, Farah. He said my name with such intimacy, as if he weren't a creature capable of killing monsters made from nightmares. I opened my mouth to demand more of an answer, but he cut me off. The force plaguing our lands and powers, that too, will pass someday, if we're cauldron blessed. But yes, now that the bogey entered these lands, I'd say it's fair to assume others might follow it, especially if the puka was already so bold. Melinda says, I can't wait to come back for more. This was amazing. Thank you. Melinda, you're a bossy boss. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll catch you on the flip side. Can't wait to see you again. Lucien says, Lucien, say if everything in Perithian was different. He said my name with such intimacy, as if he weren't a creature capable of killing monsters made from nightmares. I opened my mouth to demand more of an answer, but he cut me off. The force plaguing our lands and powers, that too will pass someday, if we're cauldron blessed. But yes, now that the bogey entered these lands, I'd say it's fair to assume that others might follow it, especially if the puka was already so bold. If the borders between the courts were gone, though, as I'd heard Lucien say, if everything in Perithian was different, as Tamlin had claimed, thanks to the blight. Well, I didn't want to be caught up in some brutal war or revolution. I doubted I'd survive very long. Tamlin strode ahead and opened to a set of double doors at the end of the hall. The powerful muscles of his back shifted beneath his clothes. I'd never forgotten what he was, what he was capable, of, what he'd been trained to do. Apparently, as requested, he said, the study. I saw what lay beyond him, and my stomach twisted. All right, that's chapter 13. Chapter 13. All right, guys. We're going to call it at chapter 13. And we will start up next week, Thursday, at 7 p.m. So at 7 p.m. next Thursday, A Court of Thorns and Roses, chapter 13. I'm looking forward to it. You guys are all bossy bosses to the max. Thank you so much for tuning in. I see you. Ow, ow. Melissa says, I can't wait to come back for more of this. This was amazing. Thank you. Absolutely. I had a blast. It is bedtime now for me. It is 9 o'clock. Ciao. TikTok, you out of here first. Boom, baby. Everybody else, Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Kick,